All right, let us get rolling, ladies and gentlemen. It is great to see you all on this fine Tuesday evening. In case you've lost track, today is Tuesday. Hopefully you haven't lost track, because it's good to know. It's good to know what's going on. If you recall last week, I explained that Shabbat helps keep us centered, because we always think of days in relation to Shabbat. So I think that's kind of a cool thing. Okay, so we are going to continue our discussion. Okay, this is Judaism at Home, and we have so much to explore. I want to start with a story. The story goes that there was once a beggar, someone who was going around asking for money. So this person knocks on the wealthy banker's door. Happens to be it's 5 a.m. and he's knocking on the banker's door. The banker is very astonished to hear somebody knocking at his door at 5 a.m. He thinks maybe it's an emergency. He goes down, and who does he see? He sees the local beggar, the guy who's is asking for money. So he says, "Listen, tzedakah, it's important, I'll give, but what's the deal? Why so 5 o'clock in the morning?" The man says, "Listen, look, Mr. Banker, here's a chaim." That's Yiddish for listen up. Yiddish course coming up Monday, but I digress. He says, "Listen, Mr. Banker, I don't tell you when you start to work. You don't tell me when I start to work. It's 5 a.m. I'm getting an early start. That's it." So tonight we're going to focus on work, because I will tell you, like we started the conversation last week, when we think about Judaism at home, and we think about what it is, how it looks, what Judaism looks like at home, you cannot avoid, and you wouldn't even want to avoid, a major discussion, my seltzer, about Shabbat. Why? Because Shabbat is one of those awesome Jewish things that are designed for home. It's not like, let me think, Wheel of Fortune. No Wheel of Fortune? Yeah? Spin the wheel, guess the things. Yeah, you know the Wheel of Fortune? Yes? So Wheel of Fortune, has, the whole thing. Wheel of Fortune is a game show. And then there's an at-home version. But the real thing is studio. Shabbat is one of those things designed perfectly for home. It's not like the second fiddle, backup version. I really like the synagogue edition. Let me try the at-home version. No. Shabbat is meant for the home. It's perfectly designed for your home, for my home. So tonight we're going to explore Shabbat part 2. The sequel is always better than the original, said no one ever. But this time, my friends, the sequel is going to be awesome. Last week, we spoke about preparing for Shabbat, and we spoke about shopping and cooking and Friday night meal and the prayers. That was last week. Tonight, we talk about Shabbat part 2 with a focus on the following. We're going to focus on the Shabbat day experience, including the prayers of Shabbat day, including the meal of Shabbat day. We're going to talk about the definition of work on Shabbat. Famously, we're supposed to not work on Shabbat. What does work mean? We'll define work, and we'll go all the way through to Havdalah. That's going to be the final piece of our puzzle. I need to reiterate. Hey, Billy, how's it going? Good to see you, bud. All right, so I need to reiterate what I said last week, because it's really important and it's really awesome. And I believe this with every atom or something, every molecule, every fiber, if you will, of my being. I believe this to be true. And that is that Shabbat is the greatest gift that human beings have ever been given. And I'll tell you why. Because we live in a fast-paced, breakneck fast-paced world. We live in a world in which we're always being told, you gotta do, you gotta accomplish, you gotta be productive. Yeah, if you're not productive, you're done for. Remember that episode of I Love Lucy? You remember that episode? Yes, you do. I know you do. I don't even have to tell you which one. The one, you know which one I'm talking about, yes? Right?
Yes, the one where she That's when her face was bonbons.
That's it. Yes, it is.
Get bigger and bigger.
Absolutely. It's like the conveyor belt is moving. She's gotta operate. She's gotta perform. You gotta keep those things moving. You gotta pop it in your mouth at some point. All right. I need to welcome Alex. Good to see you. Karen. Great to see you. Welcome, welcome. So we live in a world that's so fast paced, and it seems like the world is on this rapid conveyor belt / treadmill / whatever you want to call it, and we're just trying to keep pace. I'm telling you, this is a fact, and you know it to be true, and you don't have to believe me. It's a truth. People pay good money to detox from the craziness, the mishagas. You ever hear that word, mishagas? Yeah? Yiddish course Monday night. I'm going to say it again, folks. The mishagas of this world. People pay good money to hand in their cell phones and go on these, digital detox weekends. We have it from the get-go, or from the time that we got to Torah. We have this from the beginning, from our nationhood origin. We have this embedded in the fabric of our weekly cycle. It's a day where we take a deep breath and we don't feel compelled to do. We just are allowed to be. And it's the most liberating thing in the world. It is so liberating to just be and not have to do. So that's a little bit about Shabbat in general. Like I said before, we're going to explore some very specific details about Shabbat. Again, with a focus not on Friday night. That's so last week. And when I say last week, I don't mean last Friday night. I mean last Tuesday night. But Friday night was last week. Today is Shabbat day, and the Shabbat day meal. Does anybody hear that? Yeah, it's not the rock boiling or something like that or whatever that is. It's the cholent, my friends, because we're talking about cholent. Yes, it's going to happen today. Cholent discussion. Boom. We're moments away from cholent. If you don't know what cholent is, remember those old commercials in the 80s? Cholent. Yeah, you pour a little water. The next thing is, it's just the whole thing. Yeah, no. But cholent, we'll talk about cholent tonight. We're going to talk about work. What is work? What is not work? You're going to learn a lot, guaranteed. And finally, Havdalah. But I already told you that. So let's jump in. Here's the first big idea. As Shabbat rolls on, it picks up in levels of holiness. Now, I'm not going to do this now. We would need a whole separate class to focus on this, to do a deep dive into the prayers, into the liturgy, and to analyze some variations of the text and why we say one prayer Friday night, another one Shabbat morning, and then the next one Shabbat kind of afternoon, evening, and what's the significance. And we could have all sorts of, magical conversations about that. But take my word for it. Trust me. What could go wrong? No, take my word for it that as the day of Shabbat, the 24, 25 hours rolls on, the day picks up in holiness. So if you thought Friday night was special, just wait till you see Shabbat day. It is even more special. And I'm not saying that in any sort of, with an agenda type of message. There's no agenda here. It's just, I'm telling you what the good books say. That Friday night has one level of holiness. Shabbat day has a next level of holiness. By the time you get to Shabbat late afternoon, kind of as Shabbat is waning, as it's getting, ready to close out, right? We have a term for that in our house. Sam and Billy time. Whatever. So as Shabbat gets ready to close out, okay, that is the ultimate moment of holiness. You should know the Baal Shem Tov. The Baal Shem Tov used to have transcendental experiences at that time. That's the time. It's called Raivid D'chol Raivin, which means like the secrets of all secrets. It's the most mystical time of Shabbat. But the point is, again, generally speaking, that things pick up. The intensity picks up. Friday night is amazing. Shabbat day, even more. And then Shabbat afternoon, late afternoon, early evening, even more. So as we roll through Shabbat, we're meant to keep on going. Now, it's okay. Like I always say, it's okay to take things in steps. In general, we're meant to climb. And climbing implies step by step. Because if you try to jump, listen, only Superman can jump tall buildings in a single bound. And honestly, I don't think he was real. So here's the deal. We have steps, that we create steps in order to climb. And that's a good thing. It's a healthy thing. So Friday night, if that's the step, that's great. but I'm just laying out the steps. Shabbat day is the next step. Shabbat afternoon, evening, next step. Havdalah, final step of Shabbat. So now that we have that, so Shabbat morning, what happens? So Shabbat morning, we're chilling. Synagogues, when they're open, you can go to synagogue. Otherwise, there are prayers you can do at home. We're moving past that. Let's talk about the meal. Let's get to the food. Folks, let's talk about food. You can't go wrong with that. So Shabbat day meal is meant to be like the Friday night meal in the sense that it begins with Kiddush. That's, you're wondering like what I'm doing here. That's my Kiddush mode. Okay? My Kiddush mode is, I don't know if I demonstrated this last week. And if I didn't, my apologies. But Kiddush, yes, you got that. I'm Brady Bunch pointing at you. So what you do is you take your cup of, this is definitely not a cup of wine. This is LaCroix Pamplemousse. By the way, I just want to say this. I feel like I need to tell you this. Oops, sorry. I feel like I need to tell you this. That Pamplemousse is grapefruit. Right? You know this? Pamplemousse is grapefruit. Not everyone knows this. And I've run into problems because I have an app called Ship. They do some shopping. They can do shopping. It's like Instacart. But they have grapefruit listed. And the shoppers tell me all the time there's no grapefruit. I'm like, you know what? Forget it. Just get the pamplemousse. Oh, that they have. Done. We're good. Anyway, that's just an aside. But getting back to this. The way you hold your Kiddush cup is you put it down in your hand and you cup it like this. Right? Can you see that? I feel like it's a weird angle. I'm in a swivel chair, so it's kind of whatever. You hold it like this. So Shabbat day, you're also doing Kiddush, like Friday night. Shabbat day, you also do challah, lechem mishnah, 2 loaves of challah, just like Friday night. Shabbat day, you're supposed to do a meal that contains delicacies like fish, and if this is your deal, fish and meat and all that stuff. If not, then you don't have to eat something that you don't want to eat. But the point is to go like higher end. Typically, when you think about restaurants, you think about, like the high end, expensive restaurants, wine and meat, that's kind of usually what's on the menu. So the point is that Shabbat, holding the bottom of the stem or the bottom of the child's part of the Kiddush cup. Excellent question. Sorry, questions come in the chat, and I like to address them. Chabad custom is to use a non-stemmed Kiddush cup. I've said it. There, I've said it. Chabad custom is to use a silver becher. Becher is Yiddish for cup, Kiddush cup, I think. We'll have to find out Monday night. So you hold it, and it's the bottom. Now, Adina Malka's got one. David's got one, right? I feel like Oprah. You got one. But I'm not actually. So if you have one, you have one. Now, here's the deal. You hold it like this. If it's a stem, I would say it probably doesn't matter. You can probably hold the bottom of the base, or you can slip the fingers into the other part and hold the actual cup part. I don't know if it makes a difference. The point is, you kind of hold it, you kind of cup it like that. Getting back to this point, you want to have good food Shabbat day. Now, I will mention this is not Judaism at home now. Well, I mean it is, but Chabad in town, we have Shabbat services. Obviously, we do the prayers. After that, we have a Kiddush, we have a meal, a bit of a sit-down meal. Look. It doesn't take away from the notion of having a full-on meal. So if you're just having a little bit of food and bouncing, if you go to synagogue, you have a little bit of food and bounce, wonderful. But make sure you have a meal at home. The point is to have like an established meal. Kiddush, 2 cholent. You don't have to eat both, but have them there when you say the blessing, and then have a nice spread, have a nice good meal. Now, here's the interesting thing. Now we get to cholent. I told you it was happening within minutes, and now is the time. Cholent is a very traditional Shabbat day food item. Now, what is cholent, you might ask? Well, I'm glad you asked. Cholent is a hot stew that could be anything. I mean, there's so many different recipes. I can't tell you how many cholents I've consumed in my life, and everyone is different. I mean, some are more watery, some are thicker, some are spicier, some are tamer, some are heavy meat, some are vegetarian, some have eggs. You ever have a cholent with eggs? Anyone have cholent? Billy's saying yes. Yeah? Cholent with eggs. You throw eggs in there, the hard-boiled eggs, it's a whole thing. Kishka. Yeah? Kishka. Jews like foods with K's. You ever notice that? Knedelach. kishke, knishes, kreplach,
Kugel.
kugel, how did I forget that one? Kugel, yeah, all this stuff. By the way, please remind me. This is. I can't say it's more important than anything else I'm going to say in the class because it's not, but it's really, really important. Please remind me after the class about my potato kugel. Please, please, please. I ask you to remind me about my potato kugel because I have a very important and exciting announcement to make about that, which you need to hear. All of you here tonight need to hear this. Trust me. After the class. Right after the class. Okay, getting back to the cholent. So cholent can be called, in Israel they call it chamin, which means hot. Cholent, there's a whole debate about where the word cholent comes from. Sendrine. Oh, there you go. I was literally asking you, and I see that it pops up in the chat. Should have asked for Mashiach. Well, then we would have popped in the chat. But, okay, look. Cholent comes from the French. How do you pronounce Sendrine? Can you unmute yourself and tell me how you pronounce that?
Cholent. But you would say cholent because it comes from the Yiddish.
Right. Hot and slow. That's it. So it's a slow-cooked, hot food item. So that's one of the theories. There are other theories, but hey, listen. Tonight, that's what we're going with. The point is that cholent is your ticket to hot food Shabbat day, which we're going to talk about in a little bit, because that's kind of the only way to get hot food according to all the rules and regs, if you will, of Shabbat. That's how you get your hot food. But let's get back to the recipes. Now, you should know that when Corona first hit, I'm proud of this. Thursday nights, we did cooking with Rabbi Ari. And you may have seen it, maybe you didn't, maybe you were on it, maybe you weren't. But I did cooking shows, which I made my favorite dishes, including kugel, cholent. Ray, I know we were there together. I know others were on as well. Okay, look, here's the dealio. I have a great Texas cholent recipe. There are so many different varieties. But here's the deal. They all follow the same core formula, which is that you put it into a pot, and either it's on the fire, from before Shabbat, or it's in a crock pot. So let me explain to you the significance of where cholent comes from. You see, the Torah says, this is pure Bible. The Torah says, do not kindle fire on Shabbat. Don't kindle fire. Don't light a fire. Okay. There were some sectarians, like not mainstream, but sectarian Jews, who said, you know what, the Torah says no fire. We're going to interpret that to mean that you can't have any benefit from fire on Shabbat. The Torah says don't kindle fire on Shabbat, but we're going to take it a step further and say that means that you cannot benefit from fire on Shabbat. Understand the implication. It means that you can't have a house that has any candles lit. Once Shabbat begins, they will put out all the lights. Happy Shabbat, there in the darkness Friday night. And that also means no hot food, especially Shabbat day, because if you don't have any fires burning, you can't be keeping food hot. Now, this was absolutely, I need to emphasize this extremely emphatically or whatever. This has never been the mainstream understanding. It's not the traditional understanding. It was a fringe group. In order to debunk this, hold on a second, let's let Mark in. In order to debunk this, and in order to have a hot meal Shabbat day, right? So that's where cholent is born. Cholent is born as a statement and as a good thing to eat. The statement is, sectarians, y'all are wrong. We're gonna keep our fires burning. We're gonna keep the crock pot on. We're gonna keep the pot on the stove top on a low temperature the whole Shabbat. From before Shabbat, you gotta turn on before Shabbat, which we'll talk about a little bit later, and have it stay hot, stay cook, low simmer, low cooking, slow cooking, the whole Friday night until Shabbat morning until lunchtime, and then we're gonna eat it. And that is the ultimate statement that indeed we can benefit from fire on Shabbat. We're not lighting fire on Shabbat, but we're benefiting from a pre-existing flame. So that's one point. And the second point is, we're supposed to enjoy Shabbat, have a good meal. People like hot food, so this is your opportunity to have hot food. But the only way to do it really is to keep something on the fire the whole time, because otherwise you can't introduce something to the fire, which again we'll talk about a little bit later when we talk about cooking on Shabbat and baking on Shabbat and how that works and how do you deal with all that stuff with food issues. We'll have a full discussion about that. But the short version is, because you can't light fire on Shabbat, nor can you introduce a food item to fire on Shabbat. So in order to have hot food, it has to have been put on from before Shabbat began. So let's give a simple scenario. Shabbat begins, let's say, 8:30. This week it's close to 8:30. I think it's right around 8:30. So let's say Shabbat begins 8:30. Yeah. So if you want hot food, you gotta put food to fire or to your heat source before that. Don't put it on after that, because then you're either you're lighting the fire or you're introducing food to the fire, which is essentially cooking on Shabbat. So you have to do that before, and if you want food Shabbat day, here's spoiler alert: add a lot of water, because otherwise you're gonna have a burnt out pot. And trust me, I've been around long enough to see that happen many a time, right? And many of you may have experienced that at Chabad, for example, where we have a cholent usually every week. When we're there, obviously now it's been a few months. Many a Shabbat, not many, but on rare occasion on Shabbat morning, some sort of glitch happens in the matrix, and the next thing you know, you walk in and the place smells like fire, and you're not really sure what's going on. And what's going on is the cholent burnt. In fact, it happened a few months ago. I did the cholent. I'm going to take full responsibility for this. I did the cholent, and I adjusted the crock pot before Shabbat. Yes, David, it was a 3-alarm cholent. Yes, I got there Shabbat morning, and there were literally fire trucks outside of Chabad. And we have this automatic system that when the fire alarm goes off, it automatically triggers the, safety first. It triggers the fire department. Yeah, the fire department was literally not literally, I'm making this up, but hosing down the cholent. It wasn't, but that was going on. So you have to make sure that you have enough water, obviously, because you're keeping it on from, let's say, 7 p.m. Or people put up earlier, 5 p.m. Friday, and you're going to eat it at 12 p.m. Saturday. So how many hours is that? That is 12 plus 7, right? 19 hours? 19 hours of cooking, slow cooking. Keep your fire low. Keep your water at a right temperature. And that's why it could be watery or not watery. Who knows what goes on with that cooking methodology. But again, a pro tip is use a crock pot. Crock pots are easy because you just put on the low setting, and that usually ensures that it doesn't burn. So, all right. By the way, I should say this. I wasn't planning on saying this, but might as well. Sometimes we don't make a cholent at home. Sometimes we make a chugel. We make a chugel. What's a chugel? I'm glad you asked. A chugel is a combination of cholent and kugel. So I'll tell you what we do. We eat meat here in the Sollish household. We put meat, like good meat, at the bottom of the crock pot, and then I pour a potato kugel batter on top. Yeah, like the potato. This is not what I want you to still remind me later. This is not that. Pour potato kugel batter on top, turn it on low. Next thing you know, you have potato kugel, and cholent in this mad combo of good eats. Anyway, that's that. But cholent is a traditional Shabbat day meal. Number one, it demonstrates or expresses, it declares we're having hot food. We don't believe in the sectarian reading of the Torah. It's not true. We're allowed to be benefiting from fire on Shabbat as long as we're not lighting it on Shabbat, as long as we're not introducing something to it or magnifying it or cooking on Shabbat. It's fine. Number one. Number two, we're eating well. Okay, now we're good with cholent recipes. Google online, you can find tons of cholent recipes. That's it for cholent and for the meal. Now I want to talk about work and how we define work on Shabbat. Shabbat, we're not supposed to work, but what does that actually mean? But before I do that, let me check in with you all and make sure that everything makes sense. Everything makes sense so far? Yes? Any questions or comments? Did I miss anything in the chat? Let me know. Yes? No? We're good? Okay, let's talk about work. Torah says, don't light a fire on Shabbat, but it also says, do not do work on Shabbat. Now, to me, that sounds vague, right? Don't do work on Shabbat. Define work. Like, what do you mean? Am I not allowed to host 100 people for Shabbat dinner because I'm working? Or is that okay? How do we define work? Can I schlep a dining room table, or tables from one part of my house to another, and furniture? Yeah. How do we define work? Don't worry, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. But here we get into a very important idea that I need to share with you, and that is there's something called the written Torah and there's something called the oral Torah. So what does that mean? Written Torah is 5 books of Moses, available at fine bookshops everywhere, right? So that's the written Torah is clear, 5 books of Moses, right? That's written Torah. What is the oral Torah? The oral Torah is, well, there are many layers of oral Torah, but one layer, the layer that we'll talk about right now, is essentially the explanations that Moses got from God when God gave Moses the written text to write down. So God says to Moses, write this down, and then God says to Moses, here's what it means. So remember this, tell others, and that becomes the unbroken chain of oral Torah that is written down for the first time in the times of the Mishnah. Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, Rabbi Judah the Prince, due to the destruction of the temple and the decentralization of Jewish life, he felt that it would not be wise to rely on this unbroken oral transmission of Torah from teacher, student, parent to child, because now Jewish life is going to be decentralized and Jews will be living here and there and everywhere, right? So, Mark, I don't understand your question. Okay.
Sorry.
No worries. So let me get back to what I was saying. So he wrote down the core teachings of the oral Torah for us all to have written down. Again, as long as it could be remembered and taught orally, that was the design. But once that was no longer feasible or practical to rely on, then it had to be written down. Well, the Mishnah tells us that our tradition regarding work is that there are 39 categories of labor, of work, that we're not to do on Shabbat. 39 specific so not all work is off limits. When the Torah says do not work on Shabbat, it's specifically referring to these 39 categories. How do we know? Because tradition back from Moses. We have these 39 categories of work that are not to be done, and that's our list. Now, what are these 39 categories of work? If you have the handout that I emailed, hopefully everyone got the email with the handout. You can open it up, maybe you printed it out, whatever. Otherwise, or in addition to that, what I'm going to do is I am going to open up the file on my computer and share it with you. Isn't that nice? Sharing is caring, as my daughter always loves to say. So what I'm going to do now is, again, open up this file. It is now open, and share my screen with you. So either you could have your own version, or you could look on with me. Either way is kosher. Let's rock and roll. Forbidden work. These are the 39. The Mishnah details 39 types of work, activities that are not to be done on Shabbat. What are they? First of all, I'll tell you the Hebrew word. The Hebrew word for work in this context is melacha. Melacha. M-E-L-A-C-H-A. Melacha. Melacha is work. Melachos or melachot, plural, works. Okay. 39 melachos or melachot. 39 types of work. Divided into 3 broader categories: baking or cooking, cloth and leather making, and construction. These are the 3 primary categories, of which there are 39, and then there's the other, carrying from domain to domain, but these are the 39 specific categories. Now, these are actually not called specific categories. These are also called primary categories. So I would say there are 3 general categories, within which there are 39 primary categories, but there are also subcategories that are not listed in these 39, which I'll explain in a moment. But I'm going to run through them very quickly. So there's under baking. If you want to bake a cake, well, you have to plant a seed. What are you going to bake? Flour. Where does flour come from? Wheat. How do you get wheat? Not so fast. You gotta plant wheat. So there's sowing, there's plowing, there's reaping, there's binding sheaves, there's threshing, there's winnowing, there's selecting, there's grinding, there's sifting, there's kneading, there's baking. Wow, that's a lot of work that goes into baking. Now you know. Next is cloth and leather making. Well, shearing, bleaching, combing, dyeing, spinning, stretching the threads, making loops, weaving, separating the threads, tying a knot, untying a knot, sewing, tearing, trapping, slaughtering, skinning, that's for leather making. Trapping, slaughtering, skinning, tanning, smoothing, scoring, and cutting, those are all activities that are part of cloth and leather making. Well, then we have construction. Right? We have writing, erasing, building, breaking down, striking the final hammer's blow, extinguishing a fire, kindling a fire. And the other category, number 39, is carrying from a private domain to a public domain and vice versa. So taking something from your house to the street or outside into the public thoroughfare would be number 39, which kind of belongs into its own category. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But let's focus on the primary categories. Again, we have 3 general categories, if you will, of which there are 39 primary categories that are then subdivided into additional subcategories. And we need to talk about this because it's actually quite fascinating. The first thing that I want to talk about is, well, what's the deal with the primary and secondary categories that are not listed here? Well, primary categories are, but what are these secondary categories? So there are things that are not exactly literally one of these 39, but we know they're prohibited because they're very close. So I'll give you a few examples. Okay, you ready? Example number 1. There's a prohibition here. I'm going to try to highlight it if I can. There's a prohibition against planting, right? Sowing, putting a seed into the ground. Okay, that's going to stir growth. That's going to cause, start something growing. That's the first. Number 1 is sowing. No sowing, no planting on Shabbat. Okay. Well, a subcategory of that, not listed here, not listed, but a subcategory of that is watering a plant. Watering a plant is not listed in the 39, but the Oral Torah says that is considered to be a subcategory of planting. Why? Because just like planting is generating growth, water also helps what is already starting to grow continue to grow, and thus you are enhancing the growing process, which is essentially kind of like sowing. So therefore, that too is prohibited. Another example, and you have it in your handouts, and you can see it here at the bottom as well of this line of this page. Threshing. There's a prohibition against threshing. Threshing means separating the inside of the plant or the stalk of wheat, the kernel, from the outside. Well, it means you can't take out what's inside and bring it out. So, as a subdivision or subcategory of threshing, we have the prohibition against milking a cow on Shabbat. Milking a cow is also extracting the milk that's inside the udder outside. So that milking a cow is not okay on Shabbat. The next thing is sowing. Let's talk about sowing. Sowing is number 23. So sowing is not done, but what is sewing? Sewing is essentially connecting 2 pieces, let's say a fabric, together. Well, gluing 2 surfaces together, although it's not sewing, but gluing is pretty much the same thing. It's creating an adhesive bond between 2 things. That is a subcategory of sewing, and gluing is also not permitted. The next item I'll talk about is shearing. Shearing means you're cutting the let's say the wool from a lamb, right? So that's a prohibited number 12. Shearing is number 12. Just say the same thing would be for plucking eyebrows. Although it's not shearing, right? No lambs involved, but plucking eyebrows, I'm not actually plucking eyebrows. I'm just like kind of fake plucking, just so you know. So plucking eyebrows is part of that, is a subcategory of shearing. And the final one I'll mention, which is again in your handouts, making mud. So there's kneading. Kneading is a problem when it comes to number 10. When it comes to baking, kneading, which is basically taking dry particles, mixing water, and then creating some sort of coalesced substance. Well, that's essentially the same thing when a person takes dirt and adds water to make mud. Why would you make mud? It doesn't matter why, but making mud would be essentially the same thing as kneading. It's not literally kneading because you're not kneading the mud, but since in concept it's pretty much identical, therefore it's considered to be a subcategory. I need to tell you that the Talmud discusses the great sages, Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish, They were two of the great sages of the Talmud, and they were also brothers-in-law. And Talmud says they spent 3.5 years exploring the various categories of work, and they found 39 subcategories of each of the 39 categories. That's a lot of categories, right? So let's do the math. What's 39 squared? What's 39 times 39? 1,521 categories of work, right? 39 within the 39, each of the 39. That's a good 1521. So hopefully that gives you a bit of a sense of the diversity of labor that is proscribed, that is forbidden on Shabbat. And I think it's important to talk about why. What's common to all of these forms of work, and why. If you may have noticed that these are types of work that don't necessarily involve physical exertion. We're not talking about, you're not allowed to lift the grand piano. You're not allowed to move furniture. You're not allowed to, have serve 100 people at a Shabbat dinner. We're not talking about that, right? And why not? Why is that not work? Why are these things work? I light a fire. I light a match. That's work. But I schlep a table from one room, a heavy dining room table from one room to the other. That's not work. How does it? How does it make sense? What does it mean? So here's what you need to know. Number one, this is the list that we got. So, but there is a logic behind it. So the first point is it's the list. The list is the list. Second point is there's logic behind the list. What's the logic? We're going to study a text together in a moment. That is going to be very helpful. But let me share this first. And that is that what's common to all these types of work is that they are creative things that are done to create a change within the fabric of nature itself. These are all things that create a substantive change within the fabric of the nature of the universe, of the world. So you're introducing a seed to the earth and generating growth. You are taking two separate substances and putting them and coalescing them together to create a new entity. You're taking something and creating something else from it, or introducing or injecting change in the natural environment. That's what's common to all forms, to all these 39 forms of forbidden labor, which again, subdivisions, when you subdivide them, include pretty much many, many more. And it covers, according to the commentators, it covers pretty much all human activity that is of a creative change type. Whereas the stuff that's just about physical exertion, that doesn't create change, like real change, moving a table from one room to the other is not changing anything in the fabric of the universe. It's just changing the location of a table. Are you with me on that? You're not changing anything. It's different than planting a seed in the ground, which is now spawning something brand new. It's different than shearing the wool off of the wool off of a lamb, which then you're going to use to create threads and then create a garment. That's change. That's like real fundamental change. That's improving on the world, which we're meant to do 6 days a week. 1 day a week, we don't fix the world. We don't add. We don't improve to the world. We just accept the world as it is. 6 days a week, we create change. 1 day a week, no change. So that's what's common to all 39 categories of work, is that they're all about creative change. Whereas the other stuff, like physical labor, like, oh my gosh, I lifted this heavy thing, that's not work. It's not work as defined by Shabbat. Because remember this, Shabbat is modeled after God. How hard do you think was it for God to create the world? How much physical exertion did God use to create the world? What do you think? Was God schwitzing? Yiddish for sweating. Monday night. Was God sweating when he made the world? What do you think? Do you think God sweated? Do you think it was hard? It was harsh labor? No, it wasn't, right? What was it? I don't know, but it wasn't hard for God. But you know what it was actually? It was creative labor. God created something out of nothing. God created new stuff. The world wasn't, and then it was. God added light, added darkness, added heaven and earth, added vegetation, added animals and plants and fish and human beings. God added and created all these things. So we're meant to do all those things during the week. But then God stopped creating on Shabbat. And so we stopped creating on Shabbat also. So the work, yes, Mark, can you teach? Yes. Because teaching, which is sowing ideas, the question is asked in an even more interesting way. What about, I'm going to speak Belashon Nikia. I'll speak in a clean way. In a more refined way. What about the mitzvah of procreation? Let's keep it like that, yeah? Yeah? What about Friday night? Mitzvah of procreation. Yeah? Planting a seed. Conception. Oh, no good. You may be aware of this, you may not be aware of this. The Talmud says, Jewish law says, that while it's always a mitzvah, if you joined us for unorthodox, we talked about this, or Miriam Lipsker talked about this at length, it's always a mitzvah, right? Friday night, it's even more of a mitzvah. Here's the important point to remember. Not all forms of planting, if you will, again, euphemistic, right, are included in the prohibition, because the common denominator of the activities, or the planting in the context of the 39 malachot, those are planting and seeds growing in the earth. And it's a far different thing when we talk about ideas or we talk about procreation. No, it's not exactly the same thing. So now we want to maybe draw that connection, but we only have the connections that we know about. And the connections that aren't there, it becomes a little bit of a stretch to go there. I want to share with you another answer that I found also. It's very interesting. There are commentators that say that how do we know what is considered to be creative labor? It's things that only human beings can do. Because human beings have a creativity. So anything that animals are also doing, it's not really going to be prohibited. Animals also procreate. That's where I'm going with this. So since it's it's part of the biological natural world, it doesn't necessarily take human intelligence. Right? Not saying that human beings shouldn't use intelligence, but it's not something that's exclusive to human intelligence. Therefore, it's not included in these 39 categories of creative labor, creative change, which are about human beings. Again, there are different answers that are given. It's a good question. But as far as sharing ideas, again, the same point would be true, which is certain things are directly result from the main category, but certain things are a little bit more of a stretch that are considered to be a little bit outside of the original kind of framework of that category of work. But getting back to the larger point, because this is really important. Work is not defined by how hard you put in effort when it comes to Shabbat. It's not about the amount of exertion. It's about specifically, more or less, creative effort, creative change, implementing creative change in the world. That's kind of how we define work, or the common denominator between these 39 categories. I want to share with you a text. Let's do a text inside. You have it in your handouts. Once again, it's at the end of your handout. There's 3 texts. Let's go through 1 or 2 of them. We'll see how many we're enjoying doing together. So let me fast forward here a little bit. Let's go back. This is from Kriya Haktav HaKabbalah, Rabbi Yaakov Tzvi of Mecklenburg. Here we go. Hope you guys can see this. Let me make it a little bit bigger, just so that the text is clear. If you're looking along with me, you don't have to, but if you are, this is what I have. Text 1 in the appendix. Know that there is a difference between the Hebrew word avodah and the word melacha. Avodah refers to actions that do not require knowledge or wisdom and where nothing is being changed or fixed by the action. This is physical labor. Avodah is physical labor. Examples include carrying loads of stones, running from place to place, carrying the clothing of one's master to the bathhouse, dressing him, or any similar work of a slave. So things that require physical exertion but not a lot of creative brain power. These tasks are associated with the word avodah and eved, service and servant. The word melacha, however, is never applied in the Bible to such work. Melacha, by the way, is what the Torah says about Shabbat. So that's why we're comparing and contrasting. Avodah is the physical labor. Melacha is the Shabbat work. The term melacha, he then continues to say, applies when someone creates something new from raw materials, changing it from its previous state and improving it. Whether building or destroying, in order to rebuild, there must always be a change. In order to be malacha, you have to be changing something. When a person's work makes the world more habitable, it is called malacha. Therefore, malacha includes erasing with the intention to rewrite or demolishing with the intention to rebuild. Every malacha requires learning and knowledge to know when it should be performed and with what implement. Again, we're defining malacha as that which requires human brain power. We now understand why all the work God did during the 6 days of creation is called malacha, not avodah. As we see in the second chapter of Genesis, Therefore, we are forbidden to do malacha on Shabbat, as it says, "You shall perform no malacha." I want to highlight that word. In the biblical verse, it says, "Do not perform malacha." That's translated as work, but avodah is also work. So he says, you know why these two words? Why we have two words? Because one is the physical labor and one is the creative intellectual labor, and that's the stuff of Shabbat. But we do not find a prohibition that says you shouldn't perform no avodah on Shabbat. We don't find that verse. Consequently, he says, what's the upshot? It is permitted to carry tables and chairs, food and drink, when they are needed for the joy of Shabbat. Similarly, it is permitted to run from house to house all day and so forth. Despite the fact that there is toil and trouble, it is avodah, and God did not forbid avodah, only malacha. On the other hand, although there is no toil and trouble when one plows just a bit, plants just a bit, or writes just 2 letters, these acts desecrate Shabbat because they constitute malacha. Now, there are many types of malachot, plural for malacha. Some relate to extracting food from the ground, like plowing. Some relate to the production of garments, like weaving, sewing, and dyeing. Others relate to building homes for shelter. All of these are included in the 39 categories of labor that our sages taught in Tractate Shabbat, going all the way back to Moses at Sinai. With divine wisdom, this number includes all potential malachot. For anything not included in 39 would be a corollary of one of the 39. So anything really in the world that you can do that is changing, improving, fixing, modifying in a way that's creative and intelligent is pretty much, and creates a physical, tangible change, right, in the environment, in the world that we live in. That's you're typically going to find some sort of connection between one of the 39 categories. Again, sharing an idea is not necessarily the same thing. You haven't changed anything in the fabric of the universe or in the anatomy. That's not necessarily the same thing as creating something in the fabric of the universe. Again, just addressing the very good question that Mark asked before. So, bottom line is, avodah is permitted, malacha is forbidden. And again, I want to go back to what I said before about God. God did not do avodah. God did not sweat. God did malacha. God did creative work that changed the fabric or built the fabric of the universe from scratch. And that's what we're meant to do for 6 days like God did. And God stopped that on Shabbat. No more creation. We don't create. And I need to say this. There's a larger message here. There's a larger message. 6 days a week, we feel like we're God. That's it. God created, I also create. Yeah? God created, you call that creation? Look at what I built. God, look at the world you left us. Peh, look at what I did. It's like the guy who goes to the tailor, to the Jewish tailor. You know the shuk? All right, he goes to the Jewish tailor and he says, "Can you make me a suit?" Sure. How long is it going to take? Come back in a few weeks. A few weeks pass. Suit's ready? Nope. A few weeks later, suit? No. A month later? No. A month after that? No. 6 months later, finally it's ready. Tries it on and it fits. It's good. It's a nice suit. He says to the tailor, "I don't understand. God created the world in 6 days. And you took 6 months to create a suit. You kidding me?" He says, "Yeah, you ever look at the world? But look at the suit." Anyway, so here's the deal. Jerry, you have a rim shot for me? Thank you. Excellent. It feels like home now. It feels right. We're back to normal. Here's the point. 6 days a week, we create change. We do malacha and avodah. We sweat, but we also are creating and effecting change. And we're supposed to. It's only on Shabbat that we're not supposed to create change. 6 days a week, we create change. And in that, we mirror God. We emulate God. And you know what? You and I might feel God-like, and maybe that's not bad. Maybe that could get to our heads. There's one day a week in which we stop. And in doing so, we emulate God also, but we remember that we are creations, that we're not always creators. We remember that we're on the created side and not the creator side, although we've created for 6 days. One day a week we take off. And again, I think from an innovation perspective, if you want to speak on a very humanistic terms, let's do that. I'm not saying you did. I'm saying I do, and I'll do that right now. Anyway, that's what happened there. Here's the deal. From a very humanistic perspective, it's very hard to consistently be creative. Ask anyone who's a creative, who's in a creative job. It's very hard to consistently put out creative ideas, right? Imagine you are a copywriter. You're you're in marketing. You are Mark. I'm speaking to you. Imagine you are a designer. A developer. Whatever it is. Yeah, you're creating. It's hard to continuously create. You need to take a step back. So one day a week, God says, I stopped creating. You stop creating, and hence the 39 categories. They're all 39 categories of creative work that we don't do on Shabbat. So you're allowed to do other stuff that requires effort. That's fine. But the creative work, even if it doesn't require effort, that's where Shabbat kicks in. Now, based on all this, we have a lot of interesting things to talk about because there are a lot of ramifications from all this that have that affect how we Shabbat. So let's look at some practical applications, right? 39 categories. So now what? Let's explore that. Let's talk about cooking and baking. Let's talk about food. We can't stay too long away. We can't stay away from food too long. It's not the Jewish way. So we're back to food. Not back to the cholent necessarily, but back to food. So let's very practically, knowing the list. You have the list. You saw the list. 39 categories of work. A lot of them include cooking and baking issues and lighting fires, not lighting fires. Good. Practically speaking, Friday night you want to have a meal with hot food. What do? Let's talk about it. Let's go through that right now. Yeah, you want to have a hot meal Friday night for yourself, for your family, for your friends. I won't tell anybody if you want to have. Yeah, I'm not the next door. I'm not going to do that to you. I'm not going to report you. Don't worry. I'm kidding. Be safe. Social distance. Mask up if you need to. Whatever. But how do you enjoy a Friday night meal? Mark is asking, by the way, were these 39 categories of work performed when constructing the tabernacle? The answer is yes. But it goes back way before that to Moses at Sinai. It also happens to be that these were categories that were performed then, in the construction of the Mishkan, and God said to stop doing it on every Shabbat, take a break for a day. It also connects over there. But thank you for adding that because that's another interesting angle on that. Okay, so on Shabbat, let's say it's Shabbat. Let's say it's 9 p.m. So Shabbat started at 8:30. Let's just say 8:30 Shabbat starts. It's 9 p.m. Shabbat. At this point, we don't put food on the fire. We don't add food to the fire. We don't put it into the oven. We don't put it in the microwave. Why? Because cooking. Not supposed to cook on Shabbat. So if you're taking cold food and heating it up, even if it was already cooked, right? Let's talk about soup. Let's say you have a soup that's cold. It's in the fridge, in a container, in a pot. And now Friday night, you want to have chicken soup. So you say to yourself, it's 9 p.m. Meal starting, let's say at 10. I know it's late, but whatever. Work with me here. Meal starting at 10. You got time. It's a late meal. Whatever. All the kids are doing it. So now you're taking your pot of cold soup. You're going to put it on the fire, and you're going to go to town. You're going to have hot soup. You're recooking the soup. Not on Shabbat. So how do you do it? What do you do? Simple. Make sure you have a heat source lit before Shabbat. So it could be your stovetop, right? Your burners. It could be your oven. It could be your, like a hot plate. Anything. Have your heat source turned on, lit, whatever it is before Shabbat. Have your food in touch with the heat before Shabbat. So here are some practical ways to do it. You ready? I'm going to give you some dishes, not like tableware. I'm going to give you some food items, and let's talk about it. Let's say, I'm going to give you a menu here. Let's say Friday night, you want to do this. You want to have a chicken soup. You ready for this? You're going to have other stuff, but I'm talking about the hot food. Gefilte fish, but that's cold. Let's talk about the chalent, hot food. You're going to have chicken soup, chicken matzo ball soup, okay? You're going to have chicken. Again, chicken. We just had chicken soup. I'm not complaining about this imaginary menu. Let's say you have chicken, a tray of chicken. Yeah? Chicken soup, chicken matzo ball soup, a tray of chicken, and Rabbi Ari's potato kugel. Let's just say as a theoretical. Remember to remind me later. Let's just say as a theoretical, this is your meal. Let's just say. I'm just saying, let's just say. Right? Okay. Now, you want to have chicken soup boiling hot. You want to have hot chicken soup, and you want to have hot chicken and hot kugel. Because that's how you roll. And you know what? I'm going to throw asparagus in there as well. No extra charge. This is happening right now. You want to have some asparagus and you want it also warm. Done. What do you do? Yeah? To take everything out on Shabbat and put it onto the heat sources, no. So what do you do? So here's what you do. You could do a few things. I'm going to give you a few options. Option numeral uno. Option number one is you turn on your oven, get your oven going before Shabbat. Let's say 7:30. Yeah? Let's say the food's already cooked before Shabbat. Let's say you cooked it already Thursday night, Friday morning, whatever. Food's cooked. But now it's getting close to Shabbat, so what do? Turn your oven on. 350, 375, get it nice and hot. 7:30. Introduce your food into the oven when it's hot to get everything hot. Everything's hot now. Hot chicken, hot kugel. Right before Shabbat starts. 8:29. You ready for this? Turn off your oven. Keep the doors closed. Don't be reckless. Don't escape. Don't let the heat escape. You turn off the oven right before Shabbat. The heat stays in there. I mean, look, it's 8:30. When are you going to eat? 9:30, 10? Don't worry, the food's going to stay hot. Pretty much it's going to stay hot. That's one way. In other words, you've heated up. You got everything heated up before Shabbat. You cut it right by Shabbat. You cut the heat by Shabbat. At this point, no issues. You open it up, pull it out. You're going to town. That's one option. Second option. Second option is you put your food in before Shabbat. You put your oven on. Turn your oven on, whatever, 350, 375, or 320, whatever you want. Put your food in. Set the timer. Right? Set your timer to go for 2 more hours or 1 more hour. So it's going to keep on rocking and rolling. At a certain point on its own, it's going to extinguish, or the oven's going to, cease firing, and then you take out the food and you eat it and you enjoy it. Second option. Let's talk about a third option. Third option is use a Shabbat-friendly hot plate. They make these things. Google it. Knock yourselves out. Shabbat hot plates. We don't use one in our house, so I don't have experience with a hot plate. But you know what a hot plate is? Yeah, it's like a plate that's hot. I'm kidding. It's like a warming tray thing. So you can put food on there, and they're Shabbat friendly versions. Okay. The last one I want to talk about is the blech. The blech. First of all, I just like saying blech because it loosens up the whole throat situation, which is good. You gotta loosen that up. Blech. What's the blech? Blech means, it's Yiddish. Monday night. Yiddish for tin. What's blech? Blech is I should totally bring a blech. 1 second. Let me see if anyone can bring me a blech. Hold on 1 second. You gotta see a blech. You cannot go. Unplug it 1 second. Hey, can you bring me a blech? All right, folks, we got blechs approaching. Blechs are happening. A blech is basically an incredible invention, which we'll talk about in a moment. But what it allows you to do is essentially keep your fire on and your stovetop. We talked about oven until now and hot plates. Stovetop. Yeah? You got burners. You know how to use them. Yeah. You know what I'm talking about, right? On the top. Not the inside, the oven piece. The stovetop. Oh, thank you. Thank you, Shalom. All right. Great. It's good to have assistance. Right? Judaism at home. This is my blech. Don't judge me on my broken in blech. Don't be that person. Okay? It's not. I don't clean it after I don't scrub it and polish it. It's there. The food gets on. That's how we roll. This is my blech. This is my blech right here. Now, yes, this could be at the High Museum of Art. Yes, this could be a thing. Yeah, we can call it. I don't know, blech. Right? I was inspired by Jew food. Blech. Could be hanging on a wall near you. Look at that. But what it does is, essentially, you hear that? It's metal. So you put it on your fire. Look how thin that is. Thinner than the iPhone. But it doesn't make calls. What you do is you put it on your stovetop, and then you put your pot or your food on top of it. You adjust your fire however you like it. You put it on top, and then you could put food on top of it. The way it works is it's not technology. It's literally just a barrier of separation. But what it does is it covers an exposed flame, which makes the whole process more Shabbat friendly. Because part of what's going on in Shabbat and part of the concern of Shabbat is that you may come to increase the fire. If you want to make sure that it gets hot, you may want to increase the fire. So we try to cover the knobs and we try to cover the fire so that you're not looking at the fire. So that creates a separation, a barrier, and a reminder that it's Shabbat, and you're not going to start cranking up or cranking down. You're not going to start adjusting your fire on Shabbat, because adding to the fire is like kindling fire, talking about the stovetop, and diminishing it is a little bit extinguishing, although it's not totally out, right? But it's a little bit, it's touching on that adding and lighting and extinguishing, so we don't do it. And to remind ourselves not to do it, we use a blech. So bottom line is, if you want hot food, if you want, let's say, hot soup, warming tray is fine, Mark. I don't know what the Shabbat warming tray, Shabbat hot plate is like. I don't know if they added like a few features like to kind of cover the knobs, but you can always manually make some sort of, put foil over the knobs just to remind yourself as a sign. Yes, as a sign. Okay, Sam is asking the $1 million question, which we're about to get to. So what if you're using a blech? So you have, let's say you have a gas stove. I have a gas stove top. There's electric gas. There's what's that other kind called? The glass induction. Yeah. Okay. I have an old school. I got old school gas, right? It creates like an actual visible flame, like the blue stuff. Okay. So that's what we have. So let's say we have a chicken soup. So we'll put the fire on. Before Shabbat, we'll make sure it's boiling hot. The soup is boiling hot. When Shabbat, right before Shabbat starts, we'll turn down the fire to a much lower flame. We'll put this bad boy on top. We'll put the pot back on, and it stays hot. You take it off. Don't serve it on there, because if you're stirring it, you're like cooking, because it stirs it up. It gets the cooking going, which you don't want to do on Shabbat. Again, there's so many nuances here. So you take off the pot from the blech. Off the blech, and then you serve. And then if it's still hot and you're still holding on to it, you can put it back, but otherwise you're done. Now, what happens with the fire? Sam asked, what happened with the fire? So now what? You have a fire burning the whole Shabbat? Yes. The blech option is to have the fire burning in Shabbat. If you don't want that option, go oven. You can take out one of the racks in your oven and put your pot of soup inside. We do that also. And you could either have a timer on your oven, or you could just turn it off right before Shabbat, get it nice and hot, turn it off. It's going to retain the heat, don't worry. Your oven is going to... If you take a pot and you crank it up before Shabbat and it's boiling, and you have an oven that's set to, 375 degrees, and it's cranking, yeah? And you move the pot off the fire before Shabbat into the oven, close the oven, turn everything off, you're going to have piping hot soup in an hour. Don't worry, it's still going to be piping hot. Guaranteed. Now, if you have 3 trays of chicken and kugel and asparagus, and you have this, that, and the other, and your oven is maxed, well then your option for hot soup, if you don't have oven space, you revert back to the blech, and yeah, that means you have to have a fire on Shabbat. So we tell our kids that our kids know. You see a blech, you don't touch it, obviously. And we keep all flammables away from it. And that's it. We keep it, and we say some extra prayers. Please God, everything, the fire remains where it is. So that's it. Maybe if you're not comfortable, then there are other options. That's why I gave you like 3 or 4 options. Now, somebody asked in the chat, let me see, I saw Alexa. Let's see, Alexa. Oh, do you have to leave the oven on? Oh, the stove. Oh, yeah, we just dealt with that. Can you have Alexa set on and off timers for during Shabbat for your hot plate? The answer is yes. Yes. If you have... No, you can't turn it on Shabbat, right? You can't turn it on Shabbat and then use it to cook because you're introducing heat. But let's say you have your hot plate on. You want it Friday night for your meal, but you know your meal is going to end by, let's say, 11 o'clock. So you want that thing, that hot tray to turn off by 11 o'clock because all your food's going to be off and served and everything. You don't eat it anymore. Yeah, for sure. Why not? You can have it turn off. Not a problem. because you're not doing it on Shabbat. It's preset before. We typically use timers for lights on Shabbat. So if you have, back in the day there were mechanical timers. I mean, there still are mechanical timers, by the way. But so many homes that I knew, families that I knew, had those. What were they? I'm trying to figure out how to describe them. Not the ones with the pins and everything, because that's like an aftermarket, but a built-in little timer situation, right? Like the built-in, I don't know, hard to describe. So that's one way of doing it. Nowadays, you have Alexa, you have Philips Hue bulbs or other smart bulbs. You have, smart timers and everything. There's so many different ways to get your lights on and off on Shabbat, but that's regarding lights. Back to cooking though. Shabbat lamp, yes, Shabbat lamp is great for that. Oh, I have a shabulb. I know what you're thinking. There's no such thing as shabulb. Hold my beer, hold my kugel, folks. In this room is a shabulb, and I know what you're thinking. Also, what's a shabulb? No way, shabulb. Are you kidding me, shabulb? Shabulb. Shabulb. The beers. Take a look. Take a look at the lamp in this very room. See that lamp? Can you guys see that lamp, that light bulb? Yes?
Yes.
Ah, my God, that was light. All right, take a look. Yeah, you see the lights on? Watch this. On the bulb itself, not a light switch, there's a casing that you slide, and it's done. You see that? I don't know if you guys can see that. Can you see that, this little guy right there? Yeah? If I rotate it this way, if I slide it, it's basically a shield, a built-in shield on like an opaque shield over the light of the light bulb, but when you shift it, it exposes it and unexposes it. Anyway, available on Amazon. Very expensive. It's like 20 to 30 bucks or something, I don't remember. But it's a shabulb. It's a Shabbat-friendly light bulb. That way this is my son Mendel's room. That way he can read Friday night in his bed. And when he's done reading, he shabulbs it, and you're good to go. And he can sleep with that light on in his room. Yes, it's legal. Karen's asking, is that legal? In most states, no. No, I'm kidding. That is 100% legal, according to halacha, because you're not turning off the light. You're not creating or breaking the electrical connection, which I'm going to speak about soon. You're not doing anything with the circuitry, that's the problem with electricity on Shabbat, is it's regarding the circuitry. Here, there's no circuitry. It's essentially, imagine you have a normal light bulb, not a shabulb, right? You have a normal light bulb, and you take a large container and you place it over it to block the light. Kosher? Yeah, why not? What did you do already? You block the light. What if you shield the light with your body? Kosher? Sure, why not? So shabulb is essentially the same thing, just a little bit more in proximity to it. You take there's a little sliding mechanism. By the way, just Google shabulb. You're all on the computer anyway. I mean, I won't tell anybody if you tab away from what I'm talking about. Google shabulb, and you'll find it on Amazon. It shows you like the little slide. Better than my demonstration, you'll be able to see it on a website from whoever in the manufacturer. I believe it's SHABB, Shabulb, BULB, something like that. Whatever. Mark is asking, what about smart bulbs that Alexa controls? Absolutely. Don't voice it on Shabbat, but you can set it up beforehand. I have Philips Hue bulbs. I have something called what do I have? It's something called Wemo. Yeah. Wemo makes plug-in adapters that I use for Sukkot, for my sukkah outside, turn on and off. There's an app on my phone. I don't know why this is my phone, but there's an app on my phone that I'm able to control it and preset it before the holiday. But I also have a built-in dimmer in my dining room, a Wemo dimmer that I installed myself. And it's great because I have an app that controls my knockoffs, yeah. So I have an app that controls, so there's a physical dimmer for my dining room, which is great. Plus, it's hooked up with it's a smart control, so I can set it up. Any day of the week, I can set it to when it turns on, when it turns off. And Friday night, I have it turn off let's say at 1 a.m., just in case we go really late. So that's how we roll. So, but that's really skipping ahead. I wanted to focus on cooking, and then we were going to have to light soon, but whatever, it's fine. One more thing about the food. What else did I want to tell you about food? I said this, about removing the food from heat before serving. We don't want to stir on the fire. Knobs, dials should be covered. You know what? I covered most of it. So Linda's asking, so it's not increasing and decreasing the light. The issue would be breaking or initiating the connection. Correct. Or fueling a fire in a literal way, where you're adding like wood to a fire and making it bigger. Yeah. Okay. Correct. In other words, you're not changing the fire or the light. You're actually just increasing or decreasing a cover over it, which is not the same thing. Now, the next thing, what about, Charna. Excellent question. A motion detector that turns on the light. Yeah. Ideally, we avoid that. How? It can be complicated. So, that's a complicated question. Ideally, though, we avoid that. I will tell you, I had a motion sensor light when I bought this house. In the back, my backyard had a motion sensor thing. The first time we were celebrating Sukkot, I had my sukkah in the backyard. I walked out, not on Sukkot, but before that, and I realized that every time we walked out, it turns on. So what did I do? I got a ladder, and I took a piece of foil, and I covered the sensor. And why would covering the sensor do anything? I don't know. Whatever. But somehow I basically disabled it. So motion sensor lights, like if I'm walking and I know there's one, I usually walk around it to not trigger it. Because even though that's not my intention, but I know it's going to happen. And if I know it's going to happen, it's hard to say like I didn't do it, that sort of thing. So we try to avoid it if possible. Again, it might be complicated, but that's ideally we do that. You can go, instead of motion sense lights, you can do time-based, where at a certain time it goes on, and maybe it goes on and off with intervals. What I'm saying is there are some alternatives that are maybe not exactly that, but there are some things to explore. But it's things are complicated, or not complicated, but it's there's definitely options, but you got to work around some things. I want to talk about hot water because this is really important. And if I don't talk about this, I feel like I'm going to get myself in hot water. Joking. So what's the deal with hot water on Shabbat? The best way, so Shabbat morning you want a coffee. You need a coffee, right? You need tea, something. So what do? Here's the best way, the most Shabbat friendly way to do it. Get yourselves a hot water urn. What's a hot water urn? It's one of those things, very descriptive, right? Things that sit on your counter that has water inside. You plug it in, it boils the water, and it keeps it hot. So do that before Shabbat. Have that ready to go, and then it has a little nozzle thing, or a little, you push something down, the water comes out. That's it. That's how. So you're not. So essentially, it's like a cholent for water. Why? Because you start it before Shabbat and it's staying hot, and you're not cooking, you're not creating, you're not adding anything to it, you're not adding the fire, you're not adding the water, you're not doing anything on Shabbat. It's just staying as it was before Shabbat, and it's hot. Great, mazel tov. So that's the best way to do it. Now, if you're making coffee or tea, there's a process, because you didn't cook the water, but if you put the coffee crystals, is that what they're called? If you put the coffee crystals in the hot water, or the tea bag in the hot water, then you might be cooking the coffee or cooking the tea. Are you with me on this? Mark says no, but I'm going to say yes. So here's what we do. What we do is you take a cup, right? It's not complicated. You just take a cup and you put it under the spout. You release the water, hot water, boiling hot water, or whatever, very hot water, into your Bishul Sheni. There is it's complicated. It's not so simple to say there's no second cooking, because there's a machloket, there's a dispute about that, and we're more strict than not strict about that. Anyway, you take the first cup and you put it under the spout. You get the hot water going in there. Good. Adina Malka's got this demonstrated. You take your first cup and you pour from it into a second cup. That's called the kli sheni. It's called the second vessel. Your first vessel was the first cup. You throw it into a second cup. That process oxidizes. No, that process airs out the liquid. It cools off the liquid. And halachically, it's cooled off enough at that point. In a second cold vessel, you've poured it from the first to the second. At this point, we say there's no bishul, there's no cooking in a kli sheni in a second vessel. So at this point, once it's now not in the first cup, but in the second cup, you can now introduce your coffee or your tea into it without any issue. That is the most halachically, Jewish legally friendly way to make yourself a cup of coffee or tea. Take one cup, fill it up, pour it into a second cup, knock yourself out at that point. I mean, don't actually, but at that point you can make coffee or tea. Don't put the grounds in the second cup before you pour it. Introduce them after you pour it into the second cup, because then it's pouring from the first cup, which is not the same as second cup. Are you with me? If you preload your coffee grounds or the crystals into that second cup and you fill up the first cup and then you pour it over the second, then you're still doing something else. Joy, do you have a question? No?
Yes, I do. So my question is, what if I make my coffee like the last thing before Shabbat and I put it in a thermos and it's all nice and hot on Shabbat morning? I can pour out of that thermos, correct?
100%. Yes.
Okay.
By the way, if you make a coffee concentrate, some people do this. Some people like their pour over. They have fancy schmancy coffees, not good coffees. So you can make like a concentrate of coffee and keep it in a thermos or whatever, and then add it to hot water to kind of like dilute it and make it drinkable. But it's fine as long as you do it with the same process, right? The same process would be filling up the first cup, pouring it to the second cup, and then introducing that concentrate to the second cup. Karen is asking a very interesting question, which is, why is the lever not considered work? A lever is a simple tool because the lever is not creating anything or changing anything. There's no change that happens with the lever, right? All it is, in the case of the water, I'm not saying all levers are the same. I'm just saying in the case of the urn with the water, all it's doing is releasing the water. That's the same reason why you're allowed to, excuse me for talking about this, but you're allowed to flush a toilet on Shabbat. Why? Because there's nothing, it's purely mechanical. You're not creating, there's nothing electronic, right? It's number one. And number two, you're not creating anything. You're just opening up and closing something. That's not creating change, creative change. It's just allowing something to pass through, which is not one of the 39 categories of work. Now, yes, I do remember that question at Limud about the French press. Yes. Like opening and closing. Mark is saying like opening and closing a door, exactly. Right? Opening and closing a door would be the same thing. It's like the door's closed. You're allowed to open it, don't worry, because although something's moving, but you're not creating change. I mean, it's too simple and too basic. It's not one of the 39 categories of work. I do remember the French press, and I don't believe that outside of the question is the French press, can you use it on Shabbat? I don't remember. I'm not familiar with it because I don't drink coffee. I don't make coffee like that, or make coffee really at all. I do remember, Karen, we discussed this at Limud a few years ago, and I do remember looking it up at the time, and I remember it was kind of a little bit questionable, but I don't remember a conclusion. I don't remember if there was like a solid conclusion, and I don't have any updates. You kind of you're soaring in a French press. See, I don't know enough about the process. I looked it up a little bit then, but I really don't remember about the process. And conclusion was it was separating. Interesting. Okay. Yeah, I'm gonna rely on people that are more familiar with the process. That's another important thing about halacha, by the way, is you can't, if you're not familiar with the process, then sorry, not you, but if one is not familiar with the mechanics or the process of it, it becomes very hard to figure out what halacha says about it. Which is why, sometimes rabbis will be faced with a new technological question and maybe make a ruling, and ultimately it comes out that ruling was incorrect or that ruling has to be modified, simply because maybe the first rabbi that ruled on it didn't understand technology, and the way it was explained to them wasn't exactly accurate, because it's so nuanced. With halacha, the way you explain something is going to affect the outcome of how it fits in or doesn't fit in to one of these 39 categories. It's very nuanced. What about taking a cold shower? In general, we try not to bathe on Shabbat, and that includes showers. Anyway, there's more to talk about that, but I'm giving you the general rule. Now, regarding electronics, okay, so we talked about hot water, we talked about cooking, keeping food hot for Shabbat, we talked about cholent before, hot water and coffee and tea, let's talk about electronics. In general, we don't use electricity on Shabbat, and the simple reason, like I said before, is because when you use electricity, let's say you turn on the light, what you're doing is you're creating a circuit, you're completing the circuit. That's considered to be boneh, which is building or creating. And to close something would be or to turn off something would be to break a circuit, which is considered to be destroying in a sense. So these are considered to be toldos, the subcategories of the larger category. So this means on a practical level, this gives us the opportunity. For me, this is how I look at it. I don't look at it as, I can't. That's not fair. I don't like that. I don't like this rule at all. I look at it as, thank God, I'm given the freedom and the license to detox from technology one day a week. Because otherwise, man, oh man, it would not be a good sight. I mean, we're so in it. I can just speak for myself. I'm so connected otherwise, right? I look forward to the opportunity to unplug. So it means cell phones unplugged or turned off, computers, tablets, etc. Yeah, you don't have to turn it off. I mean, it's good to have screens off and whatever. We don't use them. If you have an alarm, you want to turn it off before Shabbat, because nothing's more annoying than an alarm that you can't turn off on Shabbat morning. Trust me, right? If you forget to turn off an alarm, if you have like an old school alarm clock or whatever it is, and that thing is going on, and the only way to get it off is by hitting something, but you don't want to, because now you don't want to break a circuit, or you don't want to electronically do something. That's going to get annoying fast. So make sure to have that taken care of before Shabbat. Lights. Either use timers, like I spoke about before, or have them set as you want them before Shabbat. For those of you familiar with Chabad House, so in the bathrooms over there on Shabbat, we actually put little blockades, mechitzas, little blockades, so that no one turns on and off. Because you know what, bathroom, you need light in a bathroom typically, so let's keep those on for Shabbat. You want to have a smart bulbs, that's fine, but I don't know how you're going to predict, throughout the 24 hours when and where, but whatever. If that works, that works. But otherwise, you just leave it on, and you hope that your ecological imprint is not, going to be substantially higher because of that, one day a week thing. So lights typically adjust. This light off, the hallway light off, the bathroom light on, the bedroom light off, the closet light on. However you want to do it. Shabal ban, shabal baf. However you want to do it. Karate Kid. Wax on, wax off. Yes? Okay. Shabal ban, shabal baf. Good. Listen, we try to get pop reference like old school. I'm getting whatever. I'm not going to talk about the trend here. So, fine. Some references, no matter what decade they're from. Mark is asking, what about lights on a dimmer? So I'm going to ask you, what about lights on a dimmer? Explain. I need more. Give me more of your question. Lights on a dimmer. Don't dim them up and down on Shabbat.
That's my question, because with a dimmer, you're not breaking the circuit. You're just making it brighter and dimmer.
I don't know how it works. But my understanding is we don't do it. I go back to what I said a moment ago. You have to really understand the technology to then know how to apply it. My understanding is that those that have explored it have come to the conclusion that it falls into the same category, and we don't do it. How it works and why it's like that, I am not qualified to answer. So yeah, and Sam is saying it's like increasing a flame, right? It's like cranking up your stovetop, which would be you already have fire, but you're adding more fuel to the fire, so to speak, by increasing it or decreasing it, taking it away. That would also be problematic. I'm assuming along similar lines we would have with the light bulbs, with the dimmer up and down. But again, listen, I have my dining room lights on a dimmer. At a certain hour it goes a little bit dimmer. I with the app I could do that. I'm not shilling for this company. I'm just saying there are ways around it, especially with technology today, very, very easy ways to make your house not only a smart home, but a Shabbat-friendly home. From a Jewish perspective, even more important, a Shabbat-friendly home. Now, big one. In my notes, take a look at this, or just listen up. Refrigerator. Guess what happens when you open up the door? Surprise! Lights go on. Lights, camera, action. 2 options that you have. Number 1, take out the bulb. I know what you're thinking. Shabulb? Maybe. No. Take out the bulb, and that way, when you turn it on, turn it off, nothing's actually happening. Or alternatively, you ready? Alternatively, tape the switches. That's what we do. You know, like when you open and close, it's got like this. That's mine. It doesn't make that sound. It just goes like up and down. I take tape. I tape gaffer's tape. I use gaffer's tape. You know gaffer's tape? I didn't know about gaffer's tape until recently. I discovered gaffer's tape. I'm loving gaffer's tape. It's great. It's not duct tape. Who wants duct tape? Leaves residue for years. Duct tape, overrated, right? Duct tapes are good for cars at a certain point in their lifespan. You got to duct tape the fender back on or something. Whatever. Duct tape is fine for its thing, right? Electrical tape. I'm not an electrician. Whatever. Gaffer's tape. I feel like I'm a gaffer. I don't know what that is, by the way, but I feel like that's right up my alley. It's strong. It doesn't leave a residue too much. I use it on Pesach to foil my my paranoid kitchen. I'm kidding. My kitchen, to get it all tin foiled up or aluminum foiled up, and it worked wonders. We now use it on the fridge. It's fantastic. So that's my go-to tape, and I use it, and it works. And I open up and close the door. Nothing happens. Now, Mark asked, what about the temperature going on and off? That's a really good question. Does the compressor go on when you open up the refrigerator door? That's why you have to be a ninja. You have to open it up and quickly, right? You be like ninja in there. You go, grab it, close it. I'm kidding. Right? There's no magic formula, but you try to do it as best as you can. And my understanding is it doesn't automatically equal, when you open the door, it doesn't automatically turn on the compressor, and therefore it's not like a light where you're walking by turning it on immediately. It's something that may or may not happen depending on other factors and how long you keep it open. We try to keep it open, as I mentioned a moment ago, for only a short amount of time in order to try to not get that going. They also have now smart appliances, or Shabbat appliances with Shabbat mode. Like my oven, I forgot to mention this before. My oven has Shabbat mode. Shabbat mode means that you can set it to stay on for a certain time. So like Friday afternoon, that's what we do. Sorry for not mentioning this before. Like, surprise, Shabbat mode. This would have been important to say before. Shabbat mode for my oven means that it stays on at a certain temperature for certain as long as you set it for it. 1 hour, 2 hours, 10 hours, 12 hours, 24, however long you want to set it. It'll stay on, and then it'll turn off at the set point. But when you open or close the door, nothing happens. No fans, no lights, no temperature change, garnished, nothing changes. Shabbat friendly. So, and they also have Shabbat friendly refrigerators. I believe there's a website. Just, you can Google Shabbat mode appliances and you can find lists. The Star K has a list, I believe, out of Baltimore. Whatever. There's different ways to go about this. Timers. If you have a timer set before Shabbat, then you're not turning it on. It's kosher. What about college football? Aha! What about college football? Can you get your big screen on a timer? On some sort of timer? Can you hack it? The answer is technically yes, but that's not really in the Shabbat spirit. Light is one thing. Lights in the with Shabbat, we're meant to add light. So light is a Shabbat-friendly activity. But college football, I know it's a religion unto itself, but it's not necessarily the same thing as Judaism. So college football, if you want to leave your TV on or get that going on in time for the big game, I don't know. Not so, there's the law and then there's a spirit sometimes with Shabbat, and that may be a challenge to the latter, but maybe not the former. Okay, next is, thermostat. Hot and cold in your home. You want to adjust that before Shabbat. Okay, I'm going to move quickly because I just have a few more things to share with you, and I want to be respectful more or less of the time that we have together. So, a few more points that I want to mention. Actually, I'm going to go straight into, muktzah. Muktzah refers to certain things that we don't touch. They're not biblically prohibited from touching, but the rabbi said don't touch it lest you come to use it in a forbidden way on Shabbat. Or maybe you're going to forget and carry it outside or whatever it is. But to forestall some, mistakes, just don't touch it. Like we don't handle money, and we don't handle pens and pencils and art supplies and nails and batteries and scissors and all that stuff. Just because, once you're handling it, you may end up using it for something, and if you're using it, it's usually not going to be Shabbat friendly at that point with those items. So that's one example of muktzah. So it's not like a biblical prohibition because you're not doing anything with it yet, you're just touching it. But the sages said, the rabbis said, and rabbis have this ability, the Torah says, listen to the rabbis. Rabbis, under certain circumstances, which we have another class for, we've done other classes on this, understanding when, where, and how, and what, but the rabbis made a legislation to say certain things don't touch because it could lead to other things that's putting the proverbial fence around the Torah. Let's go on to Havdalah. Last point. How do we close out Shabbat? What's the ceremony known as Havdalah? What is it? So it essentially, because Shabbat is so holy and spiritual, and we have this extra soul going on, so when Shabbat closes, it all comes to an end. It's like, the musical was great, and the play was awesome, and great energy, and now we just go home. Now it's all over. And it could be kind of depressing. So in order to help us segue in a healthy, positive, joyous, confident way into the work week, from Shabbat, from that oasis, from that retreat, into the grind once again, we have Havdalah. Havdalah is essentially a combination of prayers and rituals. The prayers speak to the idea that we proclaim that God is in control and God has our back and God is watching over us and God is going to be with us and God will help us through difficult times. That's kind of the essence of the prayers. And then we have a few items. We have a cup of wine, we have a candle, and we have spices. And this is what we do. We say the opening paragraph of the prayers, proclaiming how God is with us, which we need to know as we enter the darkness of the week. Then we say the blessing over the wine. Don't drink it yet. Then we say a blessing over the spices. So wine, why wine? Well, wine or grape juice, whatever. Wine is, in moderation, obviously, gladdens the heart, makes people feel a little bit more happy and more festive. And we need to be a little bit happier as we enter the dark work week. We need to start off with joy as we leave the joy of Shabbat. We need to give ourselves an extra dose of joy entering the work week. It's number one. Also, we started Shabbat with wine, we end it with a cup of wine. Same, we kind of bookend it like that. Then we go to the smelling. We say a blessing over the spices, and we smell something, traditionally cloves or cinnamon or whatever it is. We smell some smelling spices that smell nice. What's the reason for that? The idea is, again, we're going into the work week, which can be challenging. We want to make sure that we're invigorated. We can get invigorated and enthused and inspired, and we wake up in a sense with the spices by smelling them. We have the candle, we have a braided candle, and we say a blessing over the candle. By the way, these blessings over the wine, over the spice, over the candle, we're not blessing the candle, the wine, and the spice. We're blessing God for giving us the wisdom to create fire and creating things that smell nice, and for creating the wine, the food blessing. So we're always blessing God for these things, not blessing these things. That would be weird. We don't bless things. We say the blessing regarding the wine, the blessing regarding the spices, the blessing regarding the candle, and we take our fingernails and we put them near the fire and we look at our fingernails. Why? Because if you say a blessing over the fire, then you're supposed to use the fire. Like you say a blessing over the wine, you drink it, and you say a blessing over the spices and you smell it. Say a blessing over the fire, you have to use it. And the most immediate thing we have are our fingertips, so we use it to, I got to do some cuticle work over there. So we use it the most immediate, I'm just giving for instance. I need a manicure, whatever it is, right? So we look at our fingernails, it's the most immediate thing we have, no props necessary, we just do a quick glance, and we've used the fire, and that way we've utilized it after saying the blessing. Then we close it out with some more blessings, we talk with some more prayers. We thank God for giving us the ability to discern between light and darkness, good and evil, etc. And that reminds us that as we enter the work week, right? So not only are we invigorated with the wine and the spices and the light, we carry our torch into the week, but we're also confident that God gives us the ability to know right from wrong. And even as we're in the grind, we don't get ground by the grind. We don't lose our perspective. We don't lose our head in the dog-eat-dog world that we are re-entering into at that point. That's Havdalah in a nutshell. So we have all the senses. Well, not all. We have many of the senses. We have the sense of taste, the wine, smell, the spices, and we have the sight with the candle. And of course, we're hearing the Havdalah from the person that's saying it. And after Havdalah is over, we drink the wine or grape juice, and we put the candle out. We extinguish the candle in the liquid that spilled over, because we always overflow our cups. The liquid that spilled, the wine or grape juice that spilled over, we extinguish the candle in there. And then many have the custom to dip their fingers in the wine to touch. Final sense, we touch the wine. And then some put it over their eyebrows and maybe in their pockets for blessings. Gives us wisdom and maybe a little bit of gelt. Never hurts to do these traditions. That's Havdalah. So when is Havdalah done? I forgot to mention before. Havdalah is done after nightfall, Saturday night, after 3 stars come out. When is that? Consult your local Jewish calendar. All the Jewish calendars will have Shabbat start time and Shabbat end time. And it's usually like an hour after the time Shabbat started. So if Shabbat starts about 8:30, usually ends around 9:30. Give or take. It could be 57 minutes. It could be an hour and 3 or 4 or 5 minutes. It depends on time of year, planetary positioning. Who knows? That's the scoop. So that takes us to the end. It takes us to the conclusion of Shabbat and the conclusion of our course. Over the last 5 weeks, we've explored what it looks like to do Jewish at home. How to get up each morning in a Jewish way, how to eat in a Jewish way, how to pray in a Jewish way, and how to unplug every Shabbat in a Jewish way. I hope you've enjoyed these lessons and found them meaningful, inspiring, and most importantly, I hope you found them to be practical, giving you practical guidance and insight into how to implement this into your life. It's my hope that you'll use what you learned in this course to add to your Jew at home game. After all, our homes are where it's at. So, my friends, be well and let your homes be a source of light and radiance for the entire world. Thank you for joining me tonight. Thank you for joining me for this course. It's been a pleasure to study this together with you, and hopefully we all grow as a result of it. All right, thank you. Again, that formally concludes the course, but I have a few things to